I wasn't very confident. I've become very confident based on, I figured out how I learned. That made a huge difference. I figured out peak performance. That made a huge difference. And I've never stopped. How we find out what we're capable of is by pushing on our skills to the utmost again and again and again. Our potential emerges from that very action.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of Next Level University, where we teach you how to level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. We have a very, very special guest today. He is a New York Times bestselling author multiple times, an award-winning journalist, the founder and executive director of the Flow Research Collective, and he is one of the world's leading experts on human performance, the one and only Steven Kotler. How are you doing, my friend?
I am good. It's nice to be with you guys.
We appreciate the opportunity. So Alan and I have been diving into this wonderful book, The Art of Impossible, and obviously we're going to dive into that today. But usually what we do is get a little frame of who you are today and how you got there. I know you were a journalist in the 90s for extreme sports. So take us back to how this journey all started for you, and then we'll dive into The Art of Impossible.
I'll try to do it as quickly as possible. But as you pointed out, I became a journalist in the early 1990s, and journalism was exploding in the 1990s. Like suddenly everybody could put out a magazine, right? It'd been punk rockers in the 80s, but like the 90s, we got like digital publishing software, and there was money and .com boom, and like it went. So magazines were the internet before the internet. And if you could write, there was work. And you basically, it was like this menu of what are you curious about? You can get paid to learn about it, provided you can do the work. And I was super fascinated by two primary things at that point. One was neuroscience. Neuroscience in the 1990s was getting really interesting. I was really fascinated with how do human beings work. And psychology, as useful as it is metaphor. Neurobiology is mechanism. And if you're interested in human performance and you're interested in making things practical and reliable and repeatable, you want mechanism. And in the 90s was when we started being able to connect, hey, this thing is happening in the brain, hey, this is the behavior in the real world. For the very first time, emotions were mapped for the very first time. We started to figure out what creates consciousness and our sense of self, and those kinds of questions that are really kind of foundational to peak performance in a sense were being answered. Simultaneously, as you pointed out, I was obsessed with action sports. And action sports in the early 1990s were exploding, right? X Games were just starting, the Gravity Games, Mountain Dew was sponsoring people, Red Bull had, nobody knew what this weird Australian drink company was, and suddenly they were sponsoring athletes, and there was this giant explosion, and I was covering a lot of it. And if you know anything about action sports in the 1990s, it's often referred to as the so-called era of impossible, where more so-called impossible feats, things that had never been done before and really just believed were beyond human capability, they weren't even being done on a regular basis. That was happening, but they were being iterated upon. Oh, right. And so we were seeing creativity stacked on top of impossible. And it didn't it was like people were doing the impossible, and then they were innovating on the impossible, and then they were innovating on that. And it was mind bending, and it wasn't confined to any particular sport. It was across the boards in all the action sports. And I was, at the time I was, living in Squaw Valley, which was one of the meccas of this. And what I always point out is one of the reasons this caught my attention is it wasn't just that these athletes were doing the impossible on a regular basis. That alone was mind-bending. But the athletes involved, they had, most of the people I knew came from rough childhoods. They had broken homes, very little education, not a whole lot of money. There was a lot of high-risk behavior. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs, a lot of, et cetera. Generally, when you put those things together in a community, people die young or they go to jail. That's what generally happens. They don't reinvent what's possible for the human species. So my burning question was, what the hell is going on? And that's where all this work sort of started for me. The answer to what the hell is going on was flow. Obviously, I run the Flow Research Collective. So the state of flow was at the center of a lot of what I was seeing. And that became kind of the central focus of my life. And I, ended up writing, I think I've written 5 or 6 books about various aspects of flow at this point. And when the books and the journalism took it as far as I possibly could do, I started the Flow Research Collective, which is a neurobiology research and training organization. And we study what goes on in the brain and the body when people are in flow and performing at their absolute best. And then we use the science to train, over 1,000 people a month. And the reason I mentioned that number is huge data sets. So we have a lot of science on the front end. We do our work in conjunction with people at Stanford and USC and UCLA and places like that. And then we apply it, right? And use data sets, what works, what doesn't, and, at all levels of society. And as I said to you before, we train everybody from kind of, 40% of our client base is female. We train everybody from like Fortune 500 executives through professional athletes, through members of the U.S. Special Forces, through soccer moms from Indiana, or insurance brokers from Delhi, or, stockbrokers from New York, and so forth. So we have a pretty good idea of what works for everybody. And that's here's where I started, here's how I got here. And I did it in 5 minutes, which is not bad for me.
So Steven, before we dive deeper, for somebody who has never heard of flow, right? I started this personal development journey probably 4 years ago. I remember Alan telling me, and I was like, what is this? What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? Can you just walk us through what flow is? How do you know if you've experienced it? Just tell us what, your version of flow is and your understanding.
So I'm not going to tell you what my version of flow is, because that is part of the problem. There is no my version of flow. There is a scientific definition of flow. There's a psychological definition of flow, and there's a neurobiological definition of flow. Scientifically, we loosely define flow as an optimal state of performance where we feel our best and we perform our best. That doesn't get us very far, of course. More specifically, what's going to be familiar to anybody else is flow refers to those moments of kind of rapt attention, total absorption. You get so focused on the task at hand that everything else starts to disappear. Action awareness are going to merge. Your sense of self-consciousness, the voice in your head is going to diminish, get very quiet. Time is going to dilate. It's a fancy way of saying it passes strangely. Most often what happens is you get so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours go by in like 5 minutes, right? And time speeds up. Occasionally it'll slow down. You're going to freeze from effect. If you've ever been in a car crash when everything slows down, that's the freeze frame effect. And throughout, all aspects of performance, mental and physical, go through the roof. So that's what is flow? Some people call it being in the zone, runner's high. If you play basketball, you're being unconscious. If you're a stand-up comic, you're in the forever box. The lingo is sort of endless. Surfers have, I think, like 37 different terms to describe flow. At one point I counted, I think with Laird Hamilton, we got to like 37 and stopped. So there's a lot of lingo. When psychologists define flow, and this is the answer to how do you know, have you been in flow? So what they mean is they describe flow as having 6 core phenomenological, big word, I'll define it in a second, characteristics. Phenomenological basically means this is the way the experience makes me feel, right? So flow has six things that it does to us internally, and this is how we know if we're in flow. And I've listed a bunch of them already. There's complete concentration on the task at hand. There's a merger of action awareness, the vanishing of self, time dilation. We don't register peak performance. What we register, what we feel, is a sense of control. Oh, wow, I can control things I normally can't control. This is like you hear about basketball players in flow. Is only the hoop is as big as a hula hoop, and instead of being a basketball size, or this is me as a writer, suddenly having control of the English language in ways that I don't normally have on a Thursday at 10, 12 in the morning, right? Like that kind of stuff. And then the experience is autotelic, which is a fancy way of saying an end in itself. It means the experience is so euphoric, so joyous, so foundationally tied to well-being, purpose, meaning, overall life satisfaction, and happiness. Once an experience starts producing flow, we'll go really far of our way to get more of it. It means flow is really pleasurable and addictive in a sense. And so that's how we measure it psychologically. And we say, hey, when you just had an experience, these 6 things, did they show up? Did they show up at on a 1 to 7 Likert scale? Were they at a 1 level where you're not focused at all, or were they all the way up around 7? That's how we measure it. And the important thing to know, if you're trying to figure out, was I in flow, was I not in flow, is that it's not a single experience. It's like any other experience we have. It's a spectrum of experiences. Anger. You're a little annoyed. You're homicidally murderous. We still call it anger. It's just opposite ends of a spectrum. You can have microflow. This is where you go to work, you sit down to write a quickie email to your boss or your coworker about something that matters to you, and you get so sucked in, like you wanted to spend 5 minutes, you spend an hour, right? And you didn't notice time passing, and the quality of work is really good. You really communicated your ideas well. And maybe your sense of self didn't totally vanish, but bodily awareness was gone. And when you pop back into consciousness, you're like, oh, wow, I really have to pee, and you run to the bathroom. That happens to all of us all the time, right? That's micro flow. The opposite end of that spectrum is what most people think of as flow, is this rare macro flow experience that often, until the 1950s, it was classified as a spiritual experience, not meaning there was anything mystical going on, but they thought it was common to people in religious and spiritual communities. They didn't know it showed up in the general population. And then Abraham Maslow was doing a study on high achievement, and everybody in his high achievement group had found a way to drop into flow and use flow for high achievement. And by the way, when Maslow says high achievement, he doesn't just mean money, success, fame. High achievement to Maslow was self-actualization, being a good person, being kind, like those. Everybody in the study group was an atheist. So suddenly we were like, oh, wow, this isn't a mystical experience or a spiritual experience. This is common to everyone. And, that was the sort of the beginning of the transition from that spiritual language into more contemporary scientific language like flow.
Wow. So, and Steve, you had just cut out there just for a quick second, but we got most of it. One of the questions I want to ask you, I have it written up here, misunderstandings. I think that all of us, of course, want to be happy in our lives, but I don't think we fully understand what that actually means or how to sustain it over the long term. So what I talk often about is fulfillment, not just happiness. But from a neurobiological standpoint, what do you think are the misunderstandings of someone out there trying to be happy that they don't realize struggle is actually a part of that?
Oh, that's so the misunderstandings around happiness are significant. And the first is, so by the way, I do want to say, but with the work I do, which is neurobiological, when we define flow, we define it by like 7 different changes in the brain, a bunch of different changes in hormone profiles, heart rate variability, all kinds of physiological responses. So there's a precise and growing much more precise neurobiological definition of flow on the back end of all that. It's worth saying that. If happiness, to me, one of the biggest misconceptions is one, start with definitions. When positive psychologists talk about happiness, there are 3 levels of happiness, right? Level 1 is happiness. How do you feel right here, right now, in this moment? And Dan Harris wasn't wrong. You can be about 10% happier, but it's not a huge variable. There are things called emotional set points. They get set up very early in childhood, and there's a low point and a high point. And while they can be moved over time, as a general rule, all of your emotions are going to take place in between that. So you can't be much more happier than where your set points are. You can change your set points slowly over time. We'll get there in a second. But as a general rule, the wiggle room in there is about 10%. And like, we know that gratitude, mindfulness, regular exercise, like we know what the blueprint is there. That's been pretty well publicized at this point. There are a couple other things, and we'll come back to the struggle thing in a second. The next level up is engagement. It's a high flow lifestyle. I live in such a way that I get regular periodic access to flow. This could be, I live in South Lake Tahoe. There's a bunch of people who live around me who are essentially construction workers over the summer so they can ski all winter long. Skiing is an incredibly high flow activity. That's an example. I'm a writer. Writing is a very high flow activity. Coding, architecture, garden. I mean, the list goes on. Surgery, the list goes on. And most business, if you're doing it right, in a sense, is a high flow activity as well. And for sure, because I know a lot of your listeners are entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship is extremely high in flow. Again, if you're doing it correctly, in a sense. So, that's high flow lifestyle. The best we get to feel, what people call purpose, and you might call fulfillment, would be my guess, is the high flow lifestyle coupled to where the thing that is giving you flow is coupled to a cause that is greater than yourself, right? You're not just not a passion project. It's a purpose project. It's a mission a little bit. And that tends to be the best we get to feel on the planet. There's a bunch of neurobiological reasons why, but like that's where to start. So if you really want to move the lever, happiness is the wrong thing to focus on. How much flow I'm getting on a regular basis is the metric to really focus on. And the cool thing is, the only way to alter emotional set points and raise them, I want to be happier over time at a really magnificent level. Regular access to flow seems to be the only way to reset that at a higher level. You can reset it at a lower level. Death of a child or chronic unemployment will drop it down. And we know this, but regular access to flow seems to push it up. How high can you push it up? Open question. So when I think about those things, I think about that. And to your struggle question, which is the final part of it, people make a mistake when it comes to thinking about flow. They think two things. One, they think flow is a binary, like a light switch. I'm in the zone, I'm out of the zone. It's not. It's a 4-stage neurobiological cycle, right? There's different changes in the brain and the body at each stage in the cycle. Only one of the stages is called flow, right? The other stage is the first stage in the flow cycle is called struggle. You have to produce feelings of like it's not just struggle like you're gonna struggle. I'm liking a challenge. We know you have to produce cortisol. You're gonna produce a norepinephrine. It's not gonna feel good. It's not flowy, right? So a lot of people make this mistake. They think that like, oh wow, I wanna live in flow. First of all, you can't, right? If you were to quote unquote live in flow, you would have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. First off. That you can't live in flow. And second of all, to get into flow requires struggle. So you can't expect your whole life is going to feel flowy, because part of what gets you into flow is this feeling of struggle, which is kind of foundational. And the other thing to remember is that flow is this great peak experience. It does a lot of good for us, but there are going to be a lot of times in our life when the flow is gone and right, and then you're going to need really core grit skills to sustain the same level of performance you can have without flow. And peak performance is about being able to achieve, optimal levels of performance with flow as a component, but you also have to be able to do it when flow is not present, because that happens in adult life a lot.
Steven, I do optimize my life for peak performance, as Kevin mentioned, and I've been doing that for a really long time, even before I studied it. And when I got to your book, a lot of it was reaffirming and then giving me more nuances into the neurobiology of why I've designed my life the way I have. My question for you...
I don't think... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so what I was going to say is your experience reading The Art of Impossible is yes, exactly. And the reason is this. So what's different about The Art of Impossible and what the center of the book is peak performance, as you probably know, it's nothing more or less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us, right? And that biology is especially I focus predominantly on cognitive peak performance. Flow has some physical ramifications as well and some stuff in the body, but mostly I'm on the mental side. And when you're talking about the biology of peak performance, you're talking about 4 sets of skills. There's a bunch of motivation skills, a bunch of learning skills, a bunch of creativity skills, and a bunch of flow skills. That's the suite known as high performance. That's what we're actually talking about. And, those are catch-all terms. Motivation is extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, grit, goals. And my point in just like mentioning those things is that there's been obviously a peak performance revolution over the past 10, 15 years. And, a lot of the work on those subcategories is like, there's great books on flow. There's great books on focus. There's great books on grit and attention and all the elements, right? What's new and what The Art of Impossible speaks to. And I think what speaks to your experience is we now know, oh, wow, this is all a system. Right. It was designed to work together. What is new is the whole picture, and that it was designed to work together in a specific order. What I always tell people is most people's experience reading the book, if you're a peak performer, and by that I mean if you're top 30% of your field kind of thing, or if you're really interested in these concepts and have already begun applying them in your life, and you're not, maybe you're not top 30% of your field yet, but it's an either or kind of thing, you're already doing 50% of the stuff in the book, right? Your experience is going to be exactly what you had. It's, I'm doing this, but I didn't know about that. And I didn't know about that. And oh, wow, this piece is really right. Like that's the experience people have, is the puzzle coming together in a unified, codified way. That's what's new. And maybe some of the science, I think we sort of, if you're in this world, you've learned some of the science along the way, but maybe not all of it, and probably not at the depth that the neurobiological depth I'm trying to lay out in The Art of Impossible. But I really believe that cognitive literacy is important if we're going to perform at our best. We want to know what's going on in our brain and our body when we're performing at our best.
I appreciate that, and that's exactly what my experience was. It was a collective of like, oh, I'm already implementing most of these things, if not all of them, but there's a couple tweaks I can make now that I understand each layer at a different level. Why do you believe someone else should shoot for peak performance? Because I think a lot of us grow up wanting to be happy, but we don't understand that peak performance is actually the vehicle to get there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I have to do one thing. Yes, I can. But I want to do it very specifically. And before I can do that, I actually have to start by talking a little about where the book starts and motivation, intrinsic motivation, because it'll make everything that follows easier. So I said, peak performance is nothing more than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. I said, hey, in the motivation suite, there's extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, grit, and goals, and that there's an order to that sequence, right? And so the order, we know, if you want to train up performance, the place you need to start is with motivation, and you want to start with extrinsic motivation. Stuff in the world, money, sex, fame, that's extrinsic motivation, because the research is really clear. Until we make enough money to cover our basic needs, cover our bills, and have a little left over. Don't need a lot, but a little left over for fun. There's too much fear in the system. It blocks learning. It blocks performance. It's like too many problems. You can't do it. Solve that problem first, right? Get a job. Get your bills paid. Make it regular. Get out of that first. And then start to focus on intrinsic motivation. And when we say intrinsic motivation, there are 5 major intrinsic motivators. There are way more, but there are 5 big ones. And they're designed, one is designed to be built into the other, and they're designed to come online in a specific way. Curiosity is the first one. Curiosity is designed to be built into passion. Passion is designed to be coupled to a cause greater than ourselves that gives you purpose. Once this organism has a purpose, what do you want? The autonomy, the freedom to pursue your purpose. And once you have that autonomy, that freedom to pursue your purpose, you want mastery, the skills to pursue it well, right? And as a bonus, we'll come back to this later, but those are all those things I just mentioned: curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. They all function as flow triggers, flow states. You want more flow in your life. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. We'll talk about what they do at a deeper level later, but they all basically drive focus into the present moment, right? When our attention is on the now, we have an easier time getting into flow. When we're curious about something, we're focused on it. We get focused for free. That's the big deal about curiosity. Passion, we're really focused. Now we're getting a lot of, right? That's the big deal here. What does this have to do with the question you asked? So one of the biggest discoveries, I think, that, and this is new to kind of the science of happiness and peak performance and positive psychology and all that stuff, but it's really clear at this point, is first of all, I like to say we're all designed to go big, right? First of all, we're all designed for optimal performance. One of the things that's well known about flow is it's ubiquitous in humans. It's universal. Anybody, anywhere can get into flow, regardless of task, regardless of race, color, creed, like all of it doesn't matter. It's universal in humans. It's universal in most mammals, right? It's biologically available to most animals, and we all use it for peak performance. A, and B, we've known since the late 1800s, scientists, psychologists, neurobiologists, that we are designed for self-actualization. We are designed to rise to our full potential. The way to put it simply in modern, we're built to go big. And the more important point, and this is the answer to your question, not going big, not using the system how it was designed to be used is bad for us, really bad for us. And if your interest is happiness, well-being, and life satisfaction, this is the critical factor, and this is why I started with all that motivation stuff. So there are 8 major causes of anxiety and depression in the world. Anxiety and depression are the largest plague in the modern world, right? The 1 out of 10 adults is going to get diagnosed with anxiety and depression over the next year. So huge epidemic levels. It's the largest drain globally on public health coffers, and the largest blocker of productive work. And we suck at solving the problems because somebody kills themselves once every 12 seconds. So this is an epidemic. It's a crisis. It's whatever you want. And yet we know a great deal about this crisis. And oddly, nobody talks about what we know, even though this is nothing I'm saying is shocking to people who have looked at the data. There are 8 major causes of anxiety and depression. The 2 ones that get the most attention are trauma and genetics. Something terrible happened to me. I can't get over it. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. Or my genetics are bad. I'm not making enough serotonin or norepinephrine and I can't be happy, right? Those are the 2 things we hear about the most. And neither are exactly true. And when I say neither are even close to true, the vast majority of the time, trauma does not lead to PTSD. It leads to post-traumatic growth, right? Something terrible happens to us and we learn from it and we grow from it and we're better. That's the human experience. That's the vast majority of the time. When it actually leads to intractable PTSD is very, very rare in comparison to the times it leads to growth. So trauma is not the end all be all of depression that we think it is. And genetics, if you look at the data, this has been known forever. It's only 50% of the equation, right? It's always, oh, my genes may not be doing this, but it's how are you living and what was your early childhood experience? And how are you living tends to have more weight than what was your early childhood experience. So you have a lot that you can do on that one as well. What are the other 6 major causes of depression? Number 1, lack of meaningful work. What does that actually mean? It's work I'm not curious about, that doesn't align with my passion, that does not align with my purpose, that I don't have the autonomy to pursue in the way I want to. It's not afford me the opportunity for mastery, and bonus, doesn't produce any flow. Number 2, lack of meaningful values. What does that actually mean when you operationalize it? It means that you don't work and live in such a way that's aligned with your passion, your purpose, that generates, it's the same, right? If you go through all of them, they basically all function this way. We are built to go big. We are built for peak performance. Not using the system the way we're designed to be used is really, really bad for us. Epidemic level bad for us at this point.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest issues for our listeners that we've seen is not everybody has people in their corner trying to lift them to the next level. And even the people who are trying to help don't always know how.
That's why Kevin and I created Next Level Group Coaching. It's a 3-month program on teams of 10 with all people committed to achieving their goals. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
And we only take 10 people at a time, so make sure you get in quick. I thought the book blew me away, Steven, and that blew me away. Okay, I've struggled with anxiety and depression in the past. I was suicidal 4 or 5 years ago. And I know when you had Lyme disease, you were debating on taking your own life as well, obviously for different reasons. But for a lot of people, say somebody's listening to this right now and they're saying, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. Naturally, isn't the natural tendency to seek more comfort and avoid challenge? Like what?
Yeah, totally. It's really, so there's some foundational ideas in resilience. Let's not even get to grit. Let's just talk about resilience, which is another topic that's not really covered super deeply in the book. But there are a couple foundational ideas in resilience that matter here. First and foremost is don't trust your emotions. They're lying to you, right? It's really funny. It's interesting. Even physiological body signals. Oftentimes, I've been doing a lot of work on peak performance, the new field of peak performance aging. And this is a finding over and over and over again, is you can't trust. Like there's this idea that if your body is giving you pain signals, something's wrong, right? Or emotional distress signals, something's wrong at a physical level. Like you may not trust, oh, I'm depressed and anxious, and I know this isn't actually a map of my reality, but you're like, oh, I'm in pain. That's got to actually be a map of something real. And the data is pretty overwhelming that it's not, right? It's the signals we get from our body don't often mean what we think they mean. And often they mean something almost exactly opposite. Mm-hmm. So I think, you start really small. And so one of the 2 things they tell you with student comfort is when you are faced with anxiety and depression, if you're resilient individuals do not fight back with coping mechanisms, right? They fight back with habit change. And because if you go for coping mechanisms, safety, security, like one way or another, you're going like, what are we really actually talking about? You're going to hide in sex. You're going to hide in booze. You're going to hide in drugs. You're going to hide in chocolate ice cream. You're going to hide in exercise. You're going to hide somewhere, and you're going to do it excessively, and it's not going to be good for you. And then you're probably not going to get out of bed a lot, right? Like those are the things we know. You're going to overdose on certain things and then like lie around too much and watch too much TV. That's, pretty much how we're all depressed and anxious, and none of it works. And I always think, with anxiety and depression, it's a tiny chip away response. You do the simple stuff. You do gratitude lists. Because it's such, we do a lot of work with Glenn Fox at USC, who's the world's leading expert on the neurobiology of gratitude. And we've done a lot of work on how a regular gratitude practice, we know it impacts our happiness levels because it tunes the brains. I don't know if you know this, but gratitude, we take in about 9 negative bits of information for every positive bit that gets through. This is just how the amygdala is normally wired to filter information to help us keep us safe. Mm-hmm. Gratitude practice will tilt it and put it about 6 to 1. So you start taking in 3 or 4 different bits of information that are not negative. This is really important for your listenership because entrepreneurship is a game of spotting opportunity and spotting creativity. Right? Opportunity, innovation, for creativity, and opportunity, blah, blah. So consciousness is limited. Your brain, we take in 11 billion bits of information a second. You can only actually pay attention to roughly, the numbers vary, about 300 bits at once. That's like what is actually conscious of. Your actual, what is filtering in, what makes it up through all the filters, about 2,000 bits, but your awareness is about 200 to 300 bits. Just to put it in context, you're listening to me talk, that's 60 bits of information. If Alan starts talking, if we're going back and forth and Kevin's listening to us, you're processing 120 bits. You're almost max. If Kevin starts talking at the same time, I've now overloaded every one of our listeners and you cannot pay attention to anything else. So like, just to give you an idea of how limited the RAM is, it's freaking limited.
That's how our podcast used to be, Steve, when I would interrupt everybody. No, I'm just kidding.
By the way, that's any room that I'm in, any conversation I'm in, right? I'm going to talk fast. I'm going to talk over you. I'm going to talk too much.
We're going to get along fine, Steven.
Anyways, so it's a big deal, right? You're like, if you're getting in 3 extra bits of information instead of 9 negative bits, if you've got 3 positive bits coming through, every novel bit of information is the seed kernel of creativity. Creativity is recombinatory. It's when the brain notices something new, combines it with something older, an older idea, and uses it to come up with something new. That's how we spot opportunity. That's how we do creativity and innovation and all that stuff. So if you're getting 3 extra positive or non-terrifying things coming through, this is a tremendous amount of creativity and opportunity that's coming through. And you're getting this just for gratitude practice. And bonus, we now know that a regular gratitude practice makes you more flow prone. So you're getting more access to flow and it's tilting, right? This is why gratitude works for happiness. It's one of the reasons that makes you over time, it makes you more optimistic, and it founds the optimism on real, right? Like the other thing about gratitude, you guys may know this or may not, you got a built-in bullshit detector in your brain, right? Affirmations don't work because if you're looking in the mirror going, I'm a millionaire, and you work at Walmart, your brain is going to go, shut the hell up, man. You work at Walmart. Like, you're not a millionaire, and it actually is demotivating. So a lot of times those affirmations are demotivating. Gratitude, I'm so happy and grateful my legs work today. Well, that's real, right? So my brain goes right past the brain's bullshit detector, and what the brain is going is, oh, that's real. Wow, something good's happening in your life. Maybe it's less dangerous here. We don't need as much negative information. We'll take in more positive. That's right, the mechanism. That's where I start with anxiety and depression because it's easy. It takes 5 minutes. Like, okay, you've suffered from anxiety and depression. Well, what do we know works? Regular exercise, breath work, and gratitude. And if you're for anxiety and depression, 11 minutes of daily breath work, of like a focused meditation, I'm following my breath, and 5 minutes for a gratitude practice. And if you want to kill it, add in 20 to 40 minutes of exercise. You want to exercise until it's quiet upstairs, which is a signal that there's been nitrous oxide released in your system, and it's flushed stress hormones out of your system. So you've rebooted your nervous system. So if you're anxious and depressed, you don't want coping mechanisms. You don't want comfort. You want new habits, right? You don't want to trust your emotions too much, and you want to lay down 3 new habits that we know work well. And like, it's not like start with the biology, start with simple, and then, then start to modify it. But like, you can make serious progress against those conditions. And I go up and down like everybody else, and I tend to be a fairly anxious person in general. They jokingly talk about my best friend and my longtime editor is a guy named Michael Warden. He jokingly talks about my work in the world as the empire that fear built. So like, he's not wrong. Like, one of the reasons I'm such a prolific writer is because in general, it's not good up here. So I don't pay any attention. I'm just like, oh, it's not good up here. I'm gonna take all that energy and put it into writing, which makes it good up there, right? Like, I've just got different habits. The feelings are still there. I've just got really successful habits in dealing with them.
Steven, were you when you were younger, did you ever lack confidence? Or when you started setting these goals, did you, like, Alan has undying self-belief. I'm the polar opposite, where I didn't think I could accomplish almost anything. Where were you on that spectrum, and how has that changed over the years for you?
How long? So I was where you were, Kevin, when I started. And so what happened I was a mediocre student. I was a terrible athlete. I actually come from a family of some semi-gifted to gifted athletes, and I got none of their skills, like zero athletic skills. I was clumsy. I was scared. I was timid. I was shy. I'm introverted. I was very confused. Was I smart or not smart? I was creative, which made me different from everybody else, and wasn't useful until much later, right? Like, in the beginning, it was just like, I'm not like people. So that was harder to deal with. And I had zero confidence. It started to shift a little bit in high school. I started to become a slightly better skier. Regular sports I was terrible at, but like, after years of working at skiing and action sports, I started to have a little bit of skill. All my life I read. Like, it was the one thing I could do from the time I was like 3 or 4 years old. My mom, we didn't have a whole lot of money when I was born. She didn't know how to raise kids. They were very young. They were children of immigrants. They had just moved to a new city. It was, similar story. But my mom, she was like, books are good. Let's go to the library. We'll read books. That's what we'll do. And we used to come home with like 300 books from the library, and she would read them to me and I'd read them to her. So I read. And by the time I was like in 10th grade, I was writing on a daily basis because I liked that. And the reading had started to add up into some stuff. I knew some stuff, and I was starting to get some skills in like English and creative writing and a little bit of history and things like that. But what really shifted for me, the biggest thing, and you have to understand, even through high school, like, I'm a mediocre test taker. I was a B student, but I had to work. My friends would work a half an hour a day and get A's. And I was like, what? Fuck you people. Right. I would work like 17 hours to get like a B minus, right? It took everything in me just to be like less than mediocre. I was like, this is just not fucking fair, but okay. I was in, when it didn't even start to shift that much in college. It was when I started my journalism career. I was in the Amazon rainforest, and I got stuck there for about a week. I had, and there was nothing really to do, but there were there was a systems ecologist and a fly entomologist, right? A guy who studies flies and a guy who studies whole ecosystems. They were working on a project together, and I was literally stuck in the rainforest, and the project I was working on was over. And I was like, look, I'm here. I can't get out for a week. Use me. I'm your grad student. What do you need? I'll help. Right. Just like, teach me shit, and I'm your grad student and whatever. And this was like one night we were sitting around the mess tent in the middle of the rainforest. There's nobody else around. There was nobody in the jungle camp but us. And we're, I think, drinking bourbon. And they were like, well, what do you know about systems ecology? And I was like, I don't think I know anything about systems ecology, but like, let's see what you can teach me. And they started telling me about systems ecology. And in like 4 or 5 hours, I knew a great deal. And it was weird. Like I had never like onboarded knowledge like that. And then we went out into the field and it happened even faster. And afterwards, sort of at the end of the week, they were like, that's weird. We haven't seen anybody do that with this information before. And I said, I've never done that before. But the difference is you started with the system and you didn't start with the details. And once you started with the system, that's how my brain seems to work. If you give me the big picture before you give me the details, turns out I'm a macroscopic learner, meaning I need the big picture and not, all right, I get a big picture down to details. Most of our education system goes details to big picture. That's how it's built. Hierarchical, it goes up like that. I learned totally backwards to how school works. But once it got inverted, I came home from that trip. I was like, that was freaking cool. What else can I learn? And I was like, well, okay, system ecology is hard. Let's try rocket science. And I pitched a couple of rocket science articles that to major magazines where they'd have rigorous fact checking departments. So I'd have to really learn my shit to pull it off. And I sort of applied the same theory to rocket science. And I was like, well, that's neat. What else can I learn? Neuroscience. And that's sort of like this. I was 23 years old and I took my first 24 years old. I took my first neuro story literally because I had just figured out, oh, wow, I think I'm smarter than I thought. And let's see what else I could learn. And so confidence wise, and the one other thing that's an answer to your question is I hate being bad at things. So I have no problem practicing for 30 years. I know that sounds crazy to most people. Like public speaking, I'm very good at. I'm an introvert. I'm not very good at public speaking. I just got my ass kicked. The joke I always say is it took me 10 years to talk on television. Television is really hard. Podcasts are a little faster than normal life. Radio is twice as fast as a podcast or 3 times as fast in terms of how fast you have to think and talk and short. I can give you a 5-minute answer. You put me on radio, it's like 30 seconds. The host is starting to get twitchy. If I talk more than 40 seconds, they're going to do something. Get on television, it's 15 seconds and the hosts start to get twitchy. So if you think learning to talk on television is easy, it took me 10 years. I had to live with the fact that I got my ass kicked on national television for all to see for about a decade until I got it right. I still remember the day, it was Rise of Superman was the book tour and I was on Fareed Zakaria at ZPS on CNN and I finished the segment and he looked at me and went, good job. And I thought to myself, first time, man, first goddamn time. I've only been on television now for 15 years. I was like, finally, I got the shit down. So I'm a very slow learner, but I'm also I'm willing to be bad at things for a tremendously long time, as long as I know I'm going to get good eventually, right? So though my answer is I wasn't very confident, I've become very confident based on, I figured out how I learned. That made a huge difference. I figured out peak performance. That made a huge difference. And I've never stopped. And I'm 54 years old, right? And when you never stop and you get to be my age, you're like, holy shit, I've managed to pick up some skills along the way because I haven't stopped and I've been diligent and, stuff that's, totally absurd, and I just had the biggest ski year of my life, skied heavier, harder lines, taught myself how to park ski at 54, which is theoretically supposed to be impossible for anybody over the age of 35. And, so now I'm really confident because I'm okay, I'm a klutz. I'm a terrible athlete. I broke 80 bones. I shouldn't be able to learn to park ski. And,
Best answer ever when it comes to confidence. Genuinely, Steven, that was amazing. I love it.
Absolute fire. So, Steven, I talk often, and there's so many questions that I want to ask. We've got 10 minutes on the clock here. I want to respect your time. We always do.
I'll give you 15.
Oh, I appreciate you.
That, an extra 5. Alan will find a way to take it.
Yeah, for sure.
I know he will.
All right, so you've already.
I want my pound of flesh.
Yeah, you've already kind of alluded to this, but I want to try to go a little deeper on it. We did a speech recently on someone's relationship to adversity, and I think what's interesting is, I think being optimistic on the macro is really important in order to build self-confidence like you have. You've just kind of known that eventually you'll get good, even though you might quote unquote suck along the way. But I think on the micro, I think it's important to understand that life is supposed to be challenging. And you talk about it in the book, this skills challenge sweet spot, and how you should pursue things 4% outside of your current capabilities. I live my entire life around that, even to the point where I think I'm subconsciously a little late to the studio to make this harder for me. I swear to God.
And me.
Yeah,
it takes me from 4% to 24%.
Yeah, which is not necessarily good when you have a business partner who flourishes at a different percentage. But take us through, for our listeners. I believe some of our listeners have a deep belief, and I know we've all been guilty of this at times, where adversity isn't a good thing. I think that adversity can be a good thing if we think about it optimally, because imagine something bad happens, but then you believe that life is supposed to be easy. I think it messes with us. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, adversity, like you said, creates growth, creates opportunity, creates innovation. How do we help our listeners understand that adversities are inevitable, but what you do with them and your relationship to adversity is going to very much dictate a lot of how your life goes? I mean, you broke 84 bones, and here you are doing the impossible still in skiing, and I don't know what that type of skiing is, but there are 73-year-olds swimming, 12 miles easily.
I always like to
Go ahead.
I always like to point out that Stradivarius built 2 of his best violins in his 80s.
Right.
Do you know the fine muscle control and dexterity required? Like all the stuff that you're supposed to lose as we get older, Stradivarius built violins into his 80s, and his best violins were built in his 80s, which is crazy. So peak performance aging, totally different topic. Let's go back to what you asked about, which is adversity. You touched on a bunch of different stuff. Let me quickly start with the challenge, skills, balance, and then I'll address the larger question of adversity. So I said earlier, flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. I said that flow's triggers drive our attention into the present moment. We could talk about the neurobiology of what those triggers do in the brain and whatever, but the most important of those triggers is known as the challenge, skills, balance. This was not my work. This was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work done in the 60s and 70s and early 80s. It's one of the most well-researched concepts in psychology and in neurobiology at this point. And you speak physiology, you'll talk about it as the Erbs-Dobson curve, like this is everywhere. But the idea is really simple. For optimal performance, for optimal learning, for more flow, the most important flow triggers is the challenge, skills, balance. It says we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set. Mm-hmm. You want to stretch, but not snap. Mm-hmm. Now, 4% is a metaphorical number that actually Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and a Google mathematician put on the challenge, skills, balance. We tried to test it. We found that it is metaphorically accurate. And the reason I like to use it is it illustrates how it's a little bit outside your comfort zone, right? That's 4%. You're gonna have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So if you are shyer, meeker, quieter, slightly less aggressive, you're gonna have to learn to be a little more uncomfortable than you're used to, right? On the other hand, so Kevin, you're going to have to learn to be a little more uncomfortable. Alan, on the other hand, I can flat out tell you, Alan's going to have to learn to chunk down his goals a little bit to stay in that sweet spot, because he does what type A hard charging types do, like myself, bigger, faster, stronger all the time, right? Like, how do I push this? How do I push this? I'm famous for ending my staff meetings with, okay, have we gone big enough? Can we go bigger? How do we go bigger? Right? I'm famous for this. Like, I'm just wired that way. And so for guys like us, I'll take on a challenge that's like 10, 20, 30, 40% greater than my skill set for the thrill of it, right? And what the science says is you want those big, high, hard goals. They're good for motivation. Setting a properly set high, hard goal will give you an 11 and 25% boost in motivation. That's huge. That's like if an 8-hour work day is your baseline, that's like 2 free hours of work. Of course, you want those higher goals. You want to chunk it down so what is in front of you right here, right now, today is inside that scale. It's like 4%, right? So that's the challenge skills sweet spot. That means you're going to have to get peak performance demands, get comfortable being uncomfortable. But the thing I always like to point out on this front, 2 things, I guess, maybe it's 3 things when we all add it up. So the first thing, if I were to like we're sort of coming to the end of our time, so maybe there's a good time to talk about this. But if I were to look back on 30 years of studying all those moments in time when the impossible became possible, and, in every domain, in sports and science and art and technology and business, everywhere I've looked, there are a bunch of things that seem to be consistently true. One, we are all capable of so much more than we know. That's the lesson over and over and over again, right? Like the people I've spent my career studying, the people who have accomplished the impossible, they're no different than me and you. They're not any different. Everybody's got a couple of skills that maybe they're better at than other people, but everybody's got a ton of weaknesses, and we all have those skills and we all have those weaknesses. So like, disavow yourself of the talent notion. I've been under that hood in every domain, and really, like, it's hard here for all of us, and it's hard here, right? It's hard here, period. There's nobody who got, like, doesn't get easier for anyone. So on the general adversity thing, like, it's hard here. That's why they call it life, I think. But besides the point, the second thing I want to say is that while we're all capable of so much more than we know, human potential is invisible, especially to ourselves, like literally to ourselves. And when I say it's invisible to ourselves, I mean it in two ways. One, this is Adam Grant work. A bunch of other people have worked on this. You don't know what you're going to like or be good at until after you've tried it and done it for a little while. And that includes if you're an athlete, like you're LeBron James, and I say, LeBron, have you ever played badminton? No? Okay, good. Do you think you're going to be good at it? Do you think you're going to like it? He literally, the studies show, can't answer that question. He won't know until he tries it and plays it. Two, how we find out what we're capable of is by pushing on our skills to the utmost again and again and again. Our potential emerges from that very action. So if you can't get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you can't get comfortable pushing on your skills, right? Now, Kevin, you don't have to do what Alan does. That would be stupid, right?
I've
like
tried.
You've got different risks. But it's all personal on that level. Like the biological principle is the same, right? The challenge skills balance is the same for everybody. But what do we mean by challenge and skills? Very, very different, right? Like, what are your risk tolerances? Where are you on the introversion to extroversion scale? Where are your openness to experience, ability to delay gratification, tolerance for anxiety? These are huge factors that influence, and these are individual. They're big five personality things. They're sort of laid down by nature and nurture, and they're hard to change. So we want individual approaches to this, right? There's no blanket one size fits all. And there are possibly sex differences here and like things along those lines. The third thing I want to say, and this is such an obvious one, but I don't think people think about it this way. And the only reason it's so glaring to me is I spent 20 years asking these questions of people. But for about 20 years as a journalist, and then, into my book writing career, and still, whenever I meet somebody who is interesting to me or fascinating to me, or, I like that, one of the questions I always ask them is like, tell me about a couple of things that like were the big difference makers in your life, the accomplishments, the things you're proudest of, and that changed everything afterwards, right? I want to know not just the stuff you're proud of, but the accomplishments that like led to more accomplishments, right? What fed the peak performance engine? In 20 years of asking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands probably of people this question, do you know what I've never heard? Is, there was this time I was walking down the subway and I looked down and there was a lottery ticket. I picked it up and I won the lot. That the story I hear is I had to work 3 jobs to get through night school to become the right. Those are the stories you hear. Those are the stories I tell, right? The things I'm proudest of my 16 years of marriage, because that's one of the hardest things I've ever done, right? I'm proud of, certain books that took 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years to research and write and get, like, that's the stuff I'm proudest of that made the biggest difference in my life. And I don't think anybody's any different. So if we know that, if we can already look at our lives and go, oh, look, the shit that was unpleasant, that was hard, that I have to work hard, that's what really made the difference. Coupled to all the neurobiology we've been talking about ahead of this, I think, of course, we have to sort of reframe how we think of adversity, because there's tremendous opportunity there. And finally, as a last thing I will say, only because I think it's important to point out, I think everybody faces certain significant challenges in their life. I spent 3 years in bed with Lyme disease. That was just one of many. I broke 82 bones, but Lyme disease is a great example. I often think of like these big challenges as teleportation changers. I was one guy before I got Lyme disease, and I was this person. I had a version of my life that I wanted it to be, and that was the fastest way for it to happen. Without Lyme disease, to get where I am now, where I was, even on the back end of it 5 years later, would have taken 20 years. Lyme disease turned into a portal into the exact life I wanted. And there's math in, like, the harder the tragedy, the heavier the weight, the bigger the opportunity.
Wow. Such an amazing perspective, and it's a beautiful way to look at it. Steven, I know we're already somewhat over. You gave us extra time, but talk about The Art of Impossible. Genuinely changed my life. I know Alan's as well. I'm going to have to listen back to this episode for sure. But talk to us about The Art of Impossible. Where can people find it? And it is amazing, genuinely.
Thank you so much. Art of Impossible is available, bookstores anywhere. Amazon's your friend here. Support your local indie. But gift for your listeners. You've been listening to me talk about flow. We talked a little about flow triggers, probably thinking, okay, I'd like more flow. You don't have to read Art of Impossible. I'd recommend it, but you can go to www.flowblocker.com. Mm-hmm. There are 6 major flow blockers. Most of us are prey to 1 or 2 of them, big ones. So if you want more flow in your life, this is an easy place to start. It's literally a diagnostic. We built it at the Flow Research Collective. We used it with tens of thousands of people at this point. And it'll just help you find out, oh, this is what's standing in my way. And then we'll give you a handful of very useful, practical action steps on the back end in an email to help you out. And so that's just free for, anybody listening to this who kind of wants to go deeper and may not want to buy the book yet. But I just want to say that you should buy the book. You should buy 5 copies or 10 copies or 15 copies, because nothing really says Merry Christmas like The Art of Impossible. And, it's July, and we should start shopping early, because the Christmas rush this year, it's going to be big. We're going to run out of copies of the book. So as I said, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Alan and I.
If you really love Kevin and Alan, nothing says I love you, Kevin and Alan, like buying multiple copies of Art of Impossible. We were talking about this before the show started. Just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, and your
shameless pitch over. Okay, next.
And your next book will be on the neurobiology of selling. No, I'm just joking. Steven, thank you.
My next book is a sci-fi thriller that launches in November, which may or may not be about the neurobiology of selling.
Well, if you need a show to come on, Steven, we'll be here for you.
Yeah. Steven,
thanks, guys. I appreciate you.
This has been such an honor. We've been waiting for this interview for over a month and a half. We've been talking about it. You did not disappoint. Thank you so much. If you ever need anything, please reach out to either of us.
And real quick, this was way out of my comfort zone for everybody. I want everybody listening to realize, like, this was a genuine challenge for me. Hopefully you didn't notice, Steven. If you did, I know you'd understand. But it is. It's about getting out of your comfort zone to get to the next level. Steven Kotler, thank you so very much, my friend.
Is it because you're what we can't see is that you're actually wearing diapers?
No.
And no pants?
No. You know what it is, Steven? I'm not nearly as scientifically minded as you and Alan, and I knew you guys would pitch and catch, and I knew it would be difficult for me. It's that self-awareness, but I'm always willing to get out of my comfort zone to get better, so I love the challenge.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing that, Kevin. I appreciate that.
I appreciate you.
Gentlemen, you guys have a great day. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you,
Steven.
Steven.
Thanks for having me.
Talk soon. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.